So, that's running. Hey everyone. We are going to kick off the first portfolio support webinar that I'm running as EIR at New Media Ventures. So in case we have met. Jenny and I just checked this week, and I know Deepa. I'm Sabrina, and I've been working with NMV orgs to support them as they're navigating these times. And before that, I've supported the growth, scale, and development of NMV organizations for a while. So I'm happy to actually get to do that formally for my purchase in EIR, which is really important because everyone is leading through this really critical moment right now. So then that's why we're framing today's topic the way we're framing it, building resilience and entrepreneurial approach to crisis. We're obviously living through very precarious times, and you may be experiencing this in different ways based on your place, position, and privilege. What we're experiencing at this moment, navigating global pandemic, is like unique, especially as citizens and then both as also entrepreneurs. So leading through hard times has personally made me a better person and a better leader. But now we're in a period where the entire globe is enduring hard times. So I am a founder, I'm an operator, and I'm an advisor. And I've seen a lot, and I've weathered a lot of crises that are usually catalyzed from events that are outside of our immediate control, immediate circumstances. Things like the global financial crisis, humanitarian disasters, funding shortfalls, political train shifting overnight. These things happen, and then we have to figure out how we're going to go on. So the people that we've invited today are people who each have unique skill sets in navigating tough terrain. So I want to introduce our second speaker first. I met Ashley Yancey through a program where I advise startups. We were both speaking about financing startups, and as someone who's grown and scaled businesses a few times, I was really excited to co-present with you when we did, because I've learned through navigating tough times how important it is to have a relationship with your bank. And as an immigrant and as someone who has deep disdain for most institutions, this was real counter programming from what I was raised as a kid. So I watched Ashley advise two young women of color co-founders who are similarly skeptical of banks and the man. And you gave them really great counsel, and I stayed in touch with them. And a few months later, they told me how your advice specifically prevented them from signing a deal that would have put them in a really bad place. So I remember that story. I reached back out to Ashley, and we were sourcing bankers who could be excellent resources for NMV founders. So she's going to join for the second part of today. The first part of our webinar is going to be led by Aspen Baker. She's a social change consultant and author. She's a really great TED Talk, and she's a veteran nonprofit leader who was the founder of Exhale and served as its executive director for 17 years. I've served on Exhale's board, so I've had the experience of being Aspen's boss as her board chair. And then over that time, I watched Aspen build her muscle as a resilient leader and embed resiliency into an organization. So there are certain lessons and clear steps that you can distill from that. So I'm gonna hand this off to Aspen, and then you can take it from here.
Okie dokie. Thank you very much, Sabrina, and thank you, Wes, and nice to meet you, Ashley. And I think we have two participants live. Jenny, I met her, and then Deepa. What's your organization, if you mind jumping in so I know?
Hey, sure. Hi, Aspen. I'm Deepa. I am the digital director at the Sierra Club. So I'm excited to hear what y'all are going to talk about.
All right, thank you, Deepa. Well, if you guys missed it, one of the names I answer to is Ashley or Amber, and also Sierra or Tahoe. It kind of depends what people remember about whether they want to call me an A name or a mountain name. So thank you so much. So right now I'm helping leaders figure out how to get their organizations through crises. And one of the things I love to do is work with executive directors of small nonprofits on their fundraising strategies. It's primarily major donors and grassroots. And as Sabrina said, I co-founded Exhale in 2000. I served as its executive director until 2017. And I started the organization when I was in my early 20s, about 25. I started with $1,000 that had been raised from friends and family. And eventually we created, a record of success, But most of my time as an executive director felt like it was spent sort of weathering tough times, because our subject is abortion and working on abortion. So pretty much it's always a tough time. And I think what I always was trying to, balance was like the right mix of creativity and risk taking with planning and survival. And over the years, I eventually used a number of, financial services from banks, because I got to know my branch manager pretty well. So I'm happy to have Ashley follow me on talking about this. So I'm going to now share my screen with the PowerPoint, and we're going to take you through that. Okay. So entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial organizations, like members of the portfolio of New Media Ventures, are both like resilient and vulnerable in a time like this. And we're resilient because we thrive on creativity and imagination, and we're solution oriented and nimble, and we often have a high threshold for risk. At the same time, we can be more vulnerable because we're so fast moving and action oriented that we might not have the infrastructure or the plans in place that can help provide the framework for what to do when a crisis hits. And the way that you lead in a time of crisis matters a great deal to organizational survival. And it can be the difference between surviving now and sustainability in the future. And social impact organizations are unique. So the advice that I'm going to share with you is different than some of the advice I've been sharing with traditional nonprofit organizations. Because when the future is unknown and uncertain like it is now, there's three things that I think can help organizations like yours survive. And that's having entrepreneurial spirit, using an organizing framework, and having equitable organizational practices. So you all wouldn't be, a portfolio of New Media Ventures if you didn't have the entrepreneurial spirit, and it's in your DNA as organizations and as leaders. And it's the mindset that allows you to be creative about new ways to reach your goals. And in a time of crisis, very difficult decisions can get made very quickly, or the decisions are getting made for you by shelter-in-place orders or school closures. And maybe the decisions just feel very out of your hands. And yet there is still leadership decisions to be made, and the question to ask yourself about whether or not you can step into the challenge of organizational survival. And what we know is that you don't have to. And there actually isn't any shame in that, because as you know more than most, that there's a lot of barriers to survival of our organizations. Racism, sexism, xenophobia, and other forms of oppression are designed to stop you in your tracks. And that doesn't mean that you have failed, or that you're just not entrepreneurial enough, or you're just not resilient enough. It means that we're in a long line of people who are working to make things right. And sometimes we have success and sometimes we don't, but we keep trying. And so what I want you to know is that we are all enough, and you are enough. And we can work from a place of strengths and abundance, which is a weird thing to say when there is, real, measurable, factual deficits taking place, when there's not enough, mask or hand sanitizer or hospital beds, or we don't have enough childcare and or food for some families. How do we lead from a place of strengths and abundance in crisis? It means that we take careful and thoughtful consideration of what intrinsic value, talents, and assets your nonprofit has, and to consider how they can be brought to bear in this crisis. And so if you decide to step into the challenge of survival, I want you to, imagine yourself on the other side. And in this future, with whether or not your organization, survives or not, what advice would you give? What advice would your future self give to you right now? And this is part of holding the long view. And having a long view is an important resilience tactic in the midst of crisis, because the crisis will end. And we don't know the full shape that the crisis will take, and we don't know the new normal we'll find or when that end will be. But we do know that, like every crisis, it will end at some point. And so who do you want to be then? And what relationships will you hold? So as you continue to make difficult decisions, you're having hard conversations with community members and coworkers and funders and board right now in the short term. Think about how these conversations can strengthen your relationships for the rest of your life. So once upon a time, back in 2008, my organization, Exhale, we were on the cusp of like big foundation investment and national expansion. And we were about 6 years old. We were ready to grow. And I pulled off something that was pretty unheard of at the time. I got all these major reproductive health and rights funders into the same room together to give them my big pitch for what was needed and how we were going to meet that need. And in that moment, our growth and our trajectory just felt like it was a sure thing. And within days, the stock market crashed. And so not only do we lose this new growth funding we were pretty sure we were going to get, but we started to lose our regular base funding. And within a year of the crash, every single funder called me and told me that we were on the chopping block and we weren't getting any new grants. So I went back to our board and our staff and our volunteers, and I was very direct about what was happening. I said, well, we tried, you know, this could be it. This could be the end. We could close. The money was drying up. Or we could run primarily as volunteer for a period of time and try to raise money to get back on our feet. And across the board, everyone raised their hands and they said, let's do that. Let's keep going and see what can happen. And so I decided to call every funder back and let them know what we were doing in response to the challenge that we were facing. And I wasn't calling them to beg or to plead or to like save us, you know, from the pain of this crisis, but I wanted them to know what we were doing in response, because I was in relationship with these funders and these donors, and whether or not we had a grant, I still wanted to be in relationship with them because, you know, things change over time. But once I called them all back, they just couldn't, you know, deny our commitment. And they all found a way to give us something. And it was often a lot smaller than what they had given us in the past. So maybe it was $5,000 instead of $10,000. But it was all, you know, something. And we were able to survive and stay above water. So, you know, each one of your organization is, you know, has unique circumstances. This is not the stock market crash of 2008, but having an entrepreneurial spirit and being willing to be creative and adapt and to take on risk can help you get through tough times, as does having an organizing framework. So when I started my organization, people in positions of power and influence didn't trust me really, or like me, or I was a big unknown. I was making an invisible experience visible, and that was pretty uncomfortable for many. I also had a new idea. It was a new way of thinking about a problem, and it wasn't welcome at the time. And so it took years, maybe even a decade, for the organization to gain respect. And the difference was in the relationships, because initially what was perceived as dangerous became common sense over time. And we weren't a traditional, you know, political advocacy or organizing type of organization, but organizing, you know, was our operating system. And it was how we approached everything that we did. And in relationships and in organizing, and especially in crisis, we have to tell the truth. So a crisis is an opportunity to speak honestly in ways you might not have felt like you could before. And honesty builds trust. And in a time of crisis like this, people really need to know that they can trust you. So be honest about what's needed. And I know that, you know, you're probably already doing this, but you need to be talking to your most important financial supporters, your funders and your donors. And if you haven't yet, to start right away. And what I want you to remember is that these aren't just fundraising calls, that these are relationship calls. And I want you to be genuine and concerned about how they're doing. And I want you to be able to say what has happened for the organization, what you're doing in response to the crisis, and what you really need. And I think it's okay if you cry or if that is an emotional conversation, because that's real and we're human beings. What I don't want you to do is to call begging for them to save you. I want you to be like a great steward of the relationship, you know, through thick and thin, through crisis and opportunity, and as much as you can to make individual personal communication. So when it comes to donors, try to choose personal calls over mass communications as much as you can. So one of the organizations that I work with is a small nonprofit. It's primarily funded by individuals. There's very few, you know, foundation grants. There's some fee for service. But right now, spring, this is typically a very cash poor time of year for us. So we always do a fundraiser. It involves a lot of volunteers and in-person gatherings and like a whole bunch of stuff that we can't do. But we still need the money. So it wasn't like, well, we can just save this campaign till the fall. It's like, we're not going to make it to the fall if we don't do that fundraising campaign now. So we had to throw out what we usually do and build a new plan in a week. And so what we started with was internally is we asked the board to give their lead gifts. We said, here's what we're going to make. And before we ask anyone else in our community, we have to show that our leadership is behind this. So number one, we asked the board to give lead gifts. Number two, any of our donors that have restricted gifts, they like to pay for certain things or certain programs. We called them and we said, can you unrestrict this so that we can just have the cash that we need to get through this time? And across the board, everyone was like, yes, of course. This is like, thank you for asking. You know, I'm not going to hold out for, you know, this one little thing. I care about the organization. I want to say that those conversations, while successful, were often difficult in that they're heavy. You know, people are going through a heavy time. The donors are going through a heavy time. The board is. So it's not just like, I'm calling. Can you unrestrict? Unrestrict? These are heavy relationship calls, really paying attention to what different people are going through, and then also successful in terms of the fundraising need. And then, you know, after the unrestricted gifts, now we're talking about the $500 donors, and we're calling and we're saying, can you make your annual gift now, would not wait till the end of the year, and can you double it? So starting to get as much, you know, cash on hand as we can from the people who care about our organization the most. And once we did all that high touch, high personal, you know, sort of behind the scenes, then we just launched the public facing part of the emergency fund. But we are already over halfway to our goal. So by the time we're launching our public facing campaign, we're already halfway there. And now we need a little bit more help. So we decided to actually ask some volunteers to work with us. But this is not a time for people who are brand new to fundraising, who've never tried it before. We're going back to the folks who've done it before, who are donors to the organization. And we set some criteria around their ability to have emotional intelligence, that when they're talking to donors who might be having a difficult time in their own financial crisis, that our volunteer fundraisers need to be able to have that conversation, you know, in a mature way. So that is how we adapted in this time. So good stewardship, especially of donors, is critical in a crisis. And I'd say similarly to being a great steward of the relationship is, you know, one way to demonstrate that is to ask for help. So this is not a time to like hide and wait till like you get it all figured out and then sort of announce your solution. You know, this is a time to really invest in the people and the relationships that can help you solve problems. And social impact organizations are at their best when they're operating as leaderful. And that means people are sharing the load and the responsibility of leadership. So in my mind, you know, leaderful is not like everyone has a say, but everyone shares the load and responsibility of the organization's survival at this time. And for leaders and CEOs, those of us who are used to being in a positional authority and used to kind of being able to have it under control and have all the answers, this is a time, it's always a time, but particularly now, it's okay to not have all the answers and to admit it. And you can let people know what you're doing to get those answers and solutions. And you can always, you know, invite input in ways you might not have done in the past because people are stepping into new responsibilities. So I'm going to actually ask our host, Sabrina, to step in for a few minutes and talk about what it's like to share responsibilities at an organization and how that works.
Yeah, totally. What I love about this is that you talked about how it's an opportunity for everyone to show up, for like that this is everybody's job, navigating crises. And one of the things that I've learned in this experience is that it's really important to do context. Like everything's negotiable. So to call your donors and to, you know, to get things moved up, but to translate that context to companies, if you have companies that are like your billing cycle is on net 90 or net 120, to call them and say, can this be net 30? Can you do net 2 weeks? Just to make sure that there's like a clear conversation that's happening, and it's happening from a place of strength. But to get into Aspen's point about every organizational survival is everyone's job. So if you are a young, diverse person of color and you're talented in your field, you fit a specific profile that a lot of organizations want you on their board. They see that value. And so a couple of years ago, there was a period of time where I feel like I sat on everybody's board. And that has obviously changed as like my priorities and time commitments have changed. But overall, I've sat on nonprofit boards and for-profit boards that ranged from 1 million to 30 million. And I decided to treat my board service as business school, and use those roles in the rooms to learn how organizations are built and resourced. So, but I am bringing this up in this context because my experience being recruited and onboarded to Exhale's board was an outlier to my experience overall. I mean, I feel like it equipped me to be a better leader for all the organizations that I was serving. The usual practice when board members and advisors are being recruited, it's not particularly rigorous. Like they figure out, like the founders will be like, I like you, I think you're smart, can you advise? Or like you're sort of courted, and when you're accepted, you're given a binder and like you're asked to sit on a call. Like it's a very passive experience if you let it be. But with Exhale, I learned what it looked like to design a process, a recruitment process that enrolled me as an agent in the organization's success. And it also invested in my personal leadership and then the organization. And that helped me be able to be a person and a resource to support the organization in having a future. So you all rigorously vetted me. I filled out extensive surveys. I met multiple board members multiple times in different contexts. Sometimes there were formal meetings, sometimes it was coffee on a walk around a park. At times when I sat, you asked for my references, which is not a outlier, but you actually called them. And I've sat on corporate boards where they've never called my references. So I was like, oh, they're actually taking this seriously. So this was a process that was not led by Aspen. So it was not led by the CEO. It was led by other board members who were also clearly invested in making sure that this was a good fit. And if we could not have hard conversations in a screening, then we probably couldn't have hard conversations in a working relationship together. So there was a significant amount of care and rigor invested in it. And at the time, I thought the process was both a pain in the ass and like very intriguing. I was like, this is like kind of annoying. I got another meeting. And but like, because it was coming from a good, like caring place, I was like, oh, let's see where it goes. I was also very curious, why didn't other organizations approach their development process with such rigor and intentionality? So when I joined, and this gets into how I was also able, like you all invested in my leadership in a very specific way that helped me help you all in the future. So when I joined, Exhale had retained, Exhale had sought out, solicited and retained and received a specific grant just for board development. So with that came a special consultant who integrated new members into the organization. And they did that for the explicit purpose of expanding and developing a bench depth of talent. So build it before you need it tended to be like the operating principle that helped a lot. So this consultant was also a development expert and coached me and other new board members on how to fundraise, steward relationships, and be a champion of the organization. And a lot of people like to say that they have those skill sets, but it doesn't look like a specific program. But we were on monthly calls with homework after those calls, and there was like clear deliverables, and it was like it was a structured process that was like, hey, you may not know how to do this specific function, but that doesn't mean you won't be able to learn. So there was also like a growth mindset embedded in how they were approaching developing a bench depth of talent. So I thought the process Exhale ran prepared me to be a really good partner with my colleagues, and the investment in my skill set, because I didn't know any of this stuff before I'd started, was explicit, and it prepared me to make big asks on the organization's behalf in the future. And it prepped all of us to do hard things and weather tough storms together. And we all did it from a place of strength. Otherwise, you weren't in the room.
Thank you, Sabrina. And you know, there's some tough times in the past, and Sabrina and I were talking. It's like, I don't actually even remember the specifics of what the tough time was, but I know that by that point, Sabrina was the board president and chair, and we were figuring something out, and we were talking all the time, you know, and that part of that strengthened, you know, our relationship for life is that we work through this very hard problem together. And so I will always appreciate Sabrina for that, and we'll do whatever she asks me for the rest of my life. So my last piece is the equitable organizational practices. And this is where, you know, the rubber meets the road of the ideas and the mindset and the frameworks and the actual organizational practices. And this might be an area where some of the culture of entrepreneurialism, of kind of startups and innovation might not serve you as much as the problem solving pieces of it. Because if you're used to thinking about like speed and answering every question as quickly as possible and everything is kind of open to everyone, a crisis is a time to think a little bit differently. So when information is changing a lot and things are shifting, it's actually a time to slow down, because we want to reduce feelings of crisis and trauma where we can. And so if you're expecting or have already, you know, changed or adapted your spending, your programs, your strategies, your staff, the first thing to do is to designate a point person for this. We want to create a clear flow of information and not have a sort of chaotic, you know, mix of information. And so if you have a point person, you know, that's designated for certain things, you can gather questions, you can have an open door, but let people know that due to the shifting nature and the need to be accurate, that you want to collect questions and do the research and the due diligence that you need in order to come back with a thoughtful response. This also can cut down on back channeling or, you know, misinformation spreading. And it's also respectful to those who will be the most impacted by the information. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is to get very, very real about the money. And this is your cash flow management section. This is our last section before I hand it over to Ashley. I'm also going to have 2 templates for you that Sabrina is going to share after the webinar about how to do this if you're not doing it already. So what we want to find out is, when is your organization going to run out of money? Is it going to run out of money in a month? Is it going to run out of money in 6 months? Or are you going to have a time where there's a very little bit amount of money, and then you're going to get more money, and then you're going to have a little bit of money, and then you're going to have more money, so that you can plan out what you need to do with your staffing and with your expenses and with your strategy. So this is my personal recommendations for how to do cash flow management. And you want to start with your income. And you're going to project out, this month, May, June, July, August, through the rest of the year. And I would be conservative in how you're thinking about your income. So here you want to project in what you're like 96% sure you're going to get. You could, have a fundraiser and raise $500,000, but if you've never done that before, don't put it in. If you raise $500,000 every fall and you've been doing that for a few years, yes, put it in. You have a record of success in that. If you're going to get this annual grant, if your subscription services are going to stay the same, whatever that is, but make it as conservative as possible. Don't put your hopes and dreams in your cash flow. Put what you really know for sure. And then after that, when you do your expenses, here's where you can be more, liberal. If you haven't cut anything yet, just plan it out. What if we don't cut anything, we don't raise any more money, we don't cut anything, when are we going to run out of money? This is a really good piece of information to have. And then you can start to think about, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to raise more money, or how are we going to cut things in order to survive this time and come out on the other side? And so what can you realistically raise? Are you able to realign your priorities and responsibilities to focus on fundraising? And where is that money going to come from? Are you doing it by yourself? You have a board member like Sabrina that's going to help you. Who are those people that are going to help you generate the income, the revenue, the fundraising that you need to get through? And again, no magical thinking, no hopes and dreams, but also don't give up. This is about creating information to figure out our strategies. And then we're going to go down to the expense side, and we do want to think about what you can cut. And I think it's important that at this time in a crisis that you double down on your mission. So maybe the things that you do that are the most mission-y that you have don't raise you as much money, but you get more money from other things that are a little bit on the side. In crisis, you actually want to realign to be as core and as essential to your mission as you can. So realign your resources, your staffing, your programs to that essence. Be strategic about your cuts, which means like a 20% cut across the board is not a strategic cut. How do you realign so that the most essential mission thing can happen? I think Sabrina and I talked about like Stanford, which is not a, small nonprofit, but they just did like a 20% cut across the board for their hospital services. And so, a corporate staff person, 20% cut is very different than a frontline staff, 20%. So it sounds equal. You all know this because you work on equity, social change issues, not equal. So don't do that at your organization either. Make strategic cuts based off your mission and values, and really try to live your values on who and what is getting cut and who is most impacted. And then we're going to say, here's, you're going to find your gap. So you're going to project out your income, your expenses. You're going to play around with what you can realistically raise. You're going to realign your expenses, and then you still are going to have some kind of a gap. And maybe there's no income that comes after that, or maybe there is. And so you need to really assess your ability to come out on the other side of that financial hole. And if you think you can, if you have money coming in later, you have possibilities, then what you need to do is bridge that gap. Is like, how are you going to get through that cash poor time? On the income side, you know, you can talk about board loans, the board giving you a loan, lines of credit, credit cards, and then again with your expenses cutting because you are trying to survive, you're getting through this time so that you can come out on the other side. I think in this kind of thing, it's really important to consider your organizational culture and your leadership commitment so that you can assess people's comfort level with risk taking. I definitely know of some organizations that would never, never, ever think of like getting a line of credit. Those organizations have closed, you know, so it's like various levels of risk. You know, you get uncomfortable taking the risk of a line of credit, well, then you're pretty comfortable with the risk of closing. So there's no sort of consequence, like free, you know, decision in any of this, but it is have to be, you know, you can't make your organization do something its leadership is not able to. So once upon a time, I did the cash flow management at Exhale, and I saw that we were going to have $50 left in like 3 months. And I didn't think that that was a reason to close. I thought it was the number one reason is that I better ask for a lot of help. So I called up my board members and other people that I knew that had a lot of experience, and I gathered a lot of advice, and I figured out, you know, how they would approach the problem and came up, you know, with a plan. And the actions that we ended up taking was that we secured a board member who said, okay, we'll give you a loan. I'll give you, you know, 5,000, 10,000, interest-free to Exhale. I'll get it back when you get your next grant. Got a line of credit from the bank. Used up all the, you know, put all the bills on the credit cards. We cut our operating costs as much as we could. I called all the funders. I asked for early release of funds or easing of restrictions. So if they were gonna, I knew we were in the middle of a grant cycle, can you send the money to me in July instead of September? And then just like fundraise, you know, fundraise all the time. And the result of this was that every single bill was paid on time, and every staff person was retained, and that we didn't do a layoff, and we didn't do a cutback, and we didn't do a furlough. And every, you know, all that debt and the loans that we took to get through that gap, they were all repaid, you know, as soon as the new grant arrived. And there we went. So thank you all for having me. The cash flow templates are going to come to you. I'd be happy to talk with you for free for 30 minutes if you think I'd be helpful, and you can find me on my website. And now it's yours, Ashley. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, guys. I'm going to try to present my screen or
I'm going to stop my share.
Uh-oh. Well, I'm going to try to how to present my own then.
And you got to do yours, yeah.
Yeah, bear with me, guys. Sorry, I'm not the most tech-savvy person at all. Is that for the I don't see the option that it gives me to be able to present, which is weird. Sabrina, you're on mute.
Yeah, I just realized I was muted. You want to hit share screen. So right underneath that panel where it's like mute, stop, all of those controls, in the middle of that bar is a share screen.
I don't actually have a share screen. That's why I'm like, oh no. All right, hold on. Let me try one other way.
I could also share my screen because it's all on the same PowerPoint, and then just kind of.
Would you mind?
I'll just try to keep track of where you are.
Well, I can.
Yeah,
I think where I can, for whatever reason, request control from yours. So, I mean.
Okay, I'll just. Okay.
I think it was.
Sorry, everybody.
Guys.
Okay, there you go.
Thanks much. And so what it, you know, what I want to be able to talk to you guys about is making sure that you all have access to actual resources when your business is going through a bit of a tough time or some uncertainty. And so as we discuss and kind of talk through some of this, it truly first and foremost starts with having, as Aspen mentioned, having that relationship already in place with your financial institution, with your bank. We can actually go to the first slide.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Oh, it's not letting me. There we go.
There we go. So making sure that a bare minimum that there are things that you've considered when you thought about starting your relationship with your financial institution, right? Making sure that there are services that are in line initially with the way you intend to operate and function your business. So whether it's going to have access to checking accounts, have low or no fees available for you, making sure that you have ways to be able to set aside any surplus of funds that you may have accumulated over the course of the year or when times were good to be able to sustain your business, having just bare minimum of things of knowing how to access your account. In this time, a lot of customers or a lot of people are starting to realize that with the shutdown of bank branches themselves, the access to how you've been able to do your banking or how you've been able to access your business's capital and your business's resources has ultimately become limited in such. And so making sure that at a bare minimum, as you decide to begin the process or from a bare fundamental standpoint, making sure that the resources that you need access to are in line with how you want to be able to do just your basic day-to-day operations for your business. We can continue on the next slide. And so then when you think about additional resources outside of just the basics of your checking, your savings account, also making sure that there are other ways how you have envisioned to continue to still be able to operate and function. Having things like sweep accounts where you have other either resources, other financial institutions all connected for you. If you are an organization that has spread out some of your resources or you decided to have connections with other financial institutions, making sure that those are still all linked together for you all and for your organization to still properly function as you have envisioned it. So sweeps allow you the ability to still have funds either being covered and expenses being covered from one account to another, or having multiple places where deposits can go into and all then collectively swept back into one pot for you all to be able to still access and have opportunities or resource. Again, still making sure that you have opportunities to be able to have places where your clients, your donors, your funders can be able to deposit those funds for you all. Things to have in place may also be considered things like lockbox services, where there is a place where those deposits can go. And then whether it's now a reduction in staff or reduction in workforce, but still being able to have those funds being managed on a regular basis. Lockbox service is a great way to have a place where those deposits are transitioned and managed for you through your financial institution, keeping your overhead costs on a specific person or department to be able to manage those things for you, in times of uncertainty where you're thinking about where to trim back. Having that lockbox service where it's already built into your operating expenses, but there's a department that's still covering that operation for you all, may be a fantastic resource to have in place for you. Something else to really think about is in times of uncertainty, we tend to see a lot of, unfortunately, a higher opportunity for fraudulent activities to take place. And so being able to have fraud stop gaps in place for your business to make sure that you're still being able, even in these uncertain times, to know where all of your funds are going. Because trust me, it is of the utmost importance in these times to truly be able to count all of those coins, where those dollars and cents are going. And so things like positive pay service will allow your business to still have a stopgap in place to monitor funds, monitor items before they get paid out, to have some additional resources available to you to keep and make sure that you're keeping a hold and a track of every single dollar and cent for your business. Aspen, let's get the next slide, please. Thanks. In addition to that, as far as expenses being managed, funds coming out, you still want to make sure that you have a way and a methodology for your clients, your funders to still be able to get funds to you. If you're looking for donations, having things like merchant services available where clients can go either on your website, go if you're, out doing an event, but being able to have flexibility to have funds being directly deposited to you. Having and accepting debit and credit cards for those donations as opposed to before waiting for a check to be sent in the mail to you, or cash, depending on the fundraising option that you're looking for. Wanting to have some of those options available and in place. I tend to work with a lot of startups at working in the branch environment. And so a lot of times I deal and work with clients who say, that's a great service, but I don't think I'm there yet. And they put things off to the side until they think I'm ready for it. And part of the problem with that is in times of crises, the shift between I'm not ready and I need to have it, oh gosh, is sometimes somewhere back that way. And so having some of these things like merchant services available to you, which are relatively low cost and don't have a whole lot of implementation costs up front, are things that you really want to make sure you have in place. My motto is it's always best to have something before you need it. And so, the time to think about some of those services and those things like merchant and other things are always best right before you absolutely need them, because typically it's a little harder to qualify or to get when you are in a time of crisis. Hit the next slide for me. And so as Aspen mentioned, there's some of those other resources that she herself in her business had to rely on, things like business credit cards. They're there to add additional layer of protection for your business, not just in expense management, but also the safety and security of how your business operates. If you've had to go out and find additional funding or resources or deal with products and services outside of your normal activity, it's always best to have that. No problem. It's always best to have that credit card there and available for you, so that way you don't have to worry about funds as you need them. It's there and available for you to be able to rely on that and give you, again, that layer of safety and security. So you're separating and not just relying on like a debit card or anything else to be able to pull and access your funds. Often with the mail running slower, things of that nature, sometimes, as you have maybe become accustomed to doing things like writing checks, having another way and another method to be able to do your own expense management and your own expense processing is of the utmost importance during that time. Awesome, you're right on time. As far as other services to have in place, making sure that things like financing and ways to secure additional financing are in place. A lot of times we mentioned, having things like your accounts receivable, calling up and saying, hey, if that's a net 120 or net 90, can we move that up? Well, a lot of times financial institutions will allow you to lend on your outstanding account receivable. And so what they'll do is have an established line of credit already in place based on what you have anticipated on getting paid, right? And then, or your expected receivables, already having that line of credit in place before times of uncertainty are the best things to help you kind of navigate through those times when they do come in place. Being able to also extend and have lines of credit on assets that are already set for your business. If you years ago have already, invested in your business's infrastructure for things like new equipment, new computers, having a line of credit already set on things that are fixed assets for your business are great things to have in times of uncertainty or having to kind of pivot from having some surplus there where, hey, it's there and it's great, but I didn't need it, to now needing to rely on those things. it's great to already have that in place and to be able to pivot and move into using those resources because they're there and available to you. To the next slide. Sorry, thanks. All right, and definitely above all else, when you think about kind of that nest egg, planning for the future, wanting to make sure that even during the uncertain times, you still have some additional resources there for yourselves. You know, I wouldn't be a banker worth my salt if I didn't at least talk about the retirement planning piece for my entrepreneurs. So thinking long-term about things like your IRAs, a 401k, or some type of savings plan for both yourself and even if employees that you have there with you. You know, having those resources and times and things in place, you know, oftentimes you can borrow against or do short-term or, you know, withdrawals without major penalties for any investment accounts that you may have for long-term to give you another place to kind of have as a resource for yourselves and during times of uncertainty. Simple IRAs, Roth and traditional IRAs are fairly easy to establish. It's not a whole lot of paperwork or rigmarole to kind of go through and getting those established for yourselves. 401ks and SEP plans definitely are a little bit more challenging to establish. However, wanting to make sure that you have them in place for yourself, for your employees, to be able to have as resources as you guys are thinking long-term and planning, you want to make sure that those things are there to help cover you in those times of uncertainty for yourselves and for your employees. I think specifically back for myself and back in the, not the 2008s, because trust me, I was a banker during that time too, and it was tough, man. But right after that, I personally ended in going through a personal financial crisis, and having that retirement account already there was a blessing and a godsend to be able to sustain myself through the 11 months without a job and a new baby, by the way. Going through that time frame of having that retirement savings to fall back on and to support myself, you know, it's no different as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, having that nest egg of savings tucked off to the side to be able to leverage in those times of uncertainty are definitely, you know, great resources to have for yourselves. I cannot stress enough in times of uncertainty to have that savings, to have that nest egg for your company. And then when, you know, when times are good and when times are better, being able to drive and use that as a source for funding for your business. Most financial institutions will offer secured lines of credit for businesses. You know, do your own due diligence and research for what your financial institution may offer. But, you know, you can leverage that savings, that money market, that investment account as a security for line of credit or funding for your business. So absolutely take a look and see what your financial institution will be willing to use